The river is not only valuable for its biodiversity, but also for the cultural and spiritual significance that it has for communities. We do know many communities have formed, and especially, again, in the U.S., indigenous peoples would have their spiritual and cultural practices happening around rivers. We see that happening in the Balkans as well.
Welcome to another episode of Rewilding the World with me, Ben Goldsmith. And today I'm very lucky to be talking to Dragana Mileusnic from the Nature Conservancy. Dragana is actually from Belgrade, in the Balkans, but is in Brussels right now. Dragana, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Dragana, they refer to the part of the world that you're focused on, the place where you grew up, as the blue heart of Europe. Why is that?
Yes, indeed. The blue heart of Europe, the Amazon of Europe, there are many nice ways to describe the Balkans. And the reality is that it's actually one of the last places in Europe where we still have wild, pristine rivers. So growing up, it's something that I would take for granted, actually, walking along Sava and the Danube, or, driving to the Adriatic coast and then going through Morača Canyon or the Neretva Canyon. It's these karstic rivers that are turquoise in color and that are still so alive and vibrant in the freshwater biodiversity.
And which countries are we talking about specifically, Dragana?
So when we say the Amazon of Europe or the Blue Heart or the Balkans in general, we generally speak about the territories of ex-Yugoslavia. So that is today 7 countries of Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro, North Macedonia as well, Kosovo. And then we also include Albania, that you probably heard also a lot about. It didn't used to be part of Yugoslavia, but it's still part of this one big blue ecosystem of rivers and forests that are connected to each other.
And are these rivers all part of the wider Danube river system, or are some of them independent river systems?
So across this region, we actually have 2 dominant river systems. So there is the northern part drains into the Danube basin, and the southern part, the one that is actually, I would say, even richer and more unique in nature and biodiversity, drains into the Adriatic.
And I've seen these amazing images on Nature Conservancy newsletters and so on of the turquoise waters that you describe. Why is that? I've never seen anywhere else in the world photographs of rivers that are turquoise like this.
Well, this is exactly why I said growing up in this region, I think many of the locals take this for granted because we grew up looking at these rivers and enjoying them as they are. But in the past few years, since I've been working with the Nature Conservancy, I've had many guests coming from the US or India or Africa or Asia and Europe as well. And they come and they indeed say the same thing, that these rivers are really something globally unique. So what is so special? And I said, so there is part of these rivers that are draining, flowing into the Adriatic Sea. And if we would look at the map, there's the Adriatic Sea along the coast of these rivers, so Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, Albania. And on the other side, there's this Dinaric mountain range, which is all made of limestone. And so wherever you look in this region, actually the mountains are made of limestone. And limestone really works as the porous rock that drains and makes these rivers so clear and so rich in oxygen that then also in reactions with the living world in the rivers gives this wonderful color that is turquoise and that is also so pure and clean.
And in this country, Britain, where we've seen a catastrophic decline in the health of our rivers on account of pollution, on account of large numbers of dams and weirs and so on, those who are working to try to restore the migratory fish, the Atlantic salmon, the trout, they say, don't look at the river, look at the surrounding landscape if you want to gauge and figure out a plan for restoring the river itself. How is the surrounding landscape in the Balkans? The hills, the valleys, are the forests intact? You still have wildlife there?
Yes, exactly. So to give you the bigger picture, it's also important to in the Balkans understand the historical, social, cultural context. And so what actually kept this whole region as it is, which still means nature being pristine and untouched, is the wars and the slow economic development of the 90s. So while most of Europe and especially Britain have go on and developed its natural resources, this region was in wars, in also economic hardship, and the economic development only took pace again as of the, I would say, early 2000s. So it means that we haven't kind of cut our forests down. We haven't logged everything. We haven't also burned everything down and kind of in the quest for heat and power. So that also means that if we look at those rivers that are turquoise, we also have these rocky karst terrains, but we also have lush forests that are still standing there. So if you take the whole watershed approach, it is still very, very healthy, I would say. However, having said that the kind of economics and politics and culture have played a role, it also means that as of the early 2000s, as kind of the economies opened, the countries went for development, it means that also in the Balkans, we're starting to see the change of this trend, and starting to see threats coming from different sectors to nature.
And presumably the biggest ones are the threat posed by logging and also the threat posed by new hydroelectric dams, which I know we're going to talk about as part of the Nature Conservancy campaign. Is that right? Are those the two big ones?
Indeed, I would say those are the two big ones. In some areas, we also see more and more urbanization. We see tourism also putting pressure because, also with the pandemic, I guess, European tourists have discovered and rediscovered this region. So I would say there is more and more pressure for different infrastructure to be built as well. And then also what we're seeing more and more is climate change. And obviously that is the one that is really difficult to tackle, but we do see more fires in the summer and more floods, especially in the spring.
Dragana, tell me a little bit about the Nature Conservancy.
Yeah, so the Nature Conservancy is one of the largest actually global environmental organizations, and it was a discovery for me personally as well to get to know the Nature Conservancy because it's a truly global organization that's been active, especially it's been founded in the United States in 1951. So quite a long history of actually achieving very concrete results on the ground. But it only went global decades after building its presence in the US. And in Europe, I have to say, it's only been in the last decade that we've been active, and then in the Balkans only in the last 6 years pretty much. So I would say it's truly one of the most fascinating NGOs in the world, but one that is truly committed to making impact that is very visible on the ground and that both preserves nature, but also always thinks of people and especially local communities at par with nature conservation.
Yeah, when we look at the big conservation and rewilding projects in the US, nearly always the Nature Conservancy is involved in some way or other. And Dragana, how did you find the Nature Conservancy? How did you end up working there, and how long have you been there now?
So in my case, I actually did my master's in the UK, and at that life-changing year at Oxford, I actually got to meet a friend who was from Texas, from the US, and who was very passionate about Balkan rivers. So he did Fulbright scholarship there, studied there, got to know and appreciate these rivers in a kind of different way than I used to. And so we got to meet there, and then lost touch after years of studying, and then reconnected years after when TNC was starting the Balkans program. So he kind of invited me and introduced me to TNC and its amazing work. And ever since I've been the one then leading the program forward.
And this is the big project of the Nature Conservancy in Europe, this Blue Heart program in the Balkan states.
Exactly. So this is in a way our first on-the-ground program, and it really turned into a big flagship program. It really started with the idea that we can bring something new and add value and raise the voices of our local partners who are really doing the work on the ground.
And the Nature Conservancy is basing itself in Brussels or in Belgrade on the ground to work on this?
So we started working in Brussels. So Brussels has been my home for the past 10 years. And so working also with different NGOs. This is where we started because our primary goal was to really support partners in doing the work on the ground. And then over time, as we kind of branched out the work, we started also building some presence on the ground. So we now also have our own staff and office in Croatia as well as in Belgrade in Serbia.
Yeah, and the program is principally focused around the prevention of a slew of new hydroelectric projects. Is that not the greatest threat right now on which you're working? And how do you head off that threat? Europe is pushing hard for the expansion of clean energy and the phasing out of fossil fuels, and people think of hydroelectric dams as green energy. And once you take into account, of course, the strangulation effect that they have on the rivers and the catastrophic effect they have on the whole ecosystem, they don't look so green. So what's the strategy there?
Indeed. And so that is exactly why the strategy is not always, the simplest to maybe to explain and describe, but this is also why we believe that it's very important that the Nature Conservancy brings value and focus on solutions and see how can we actually resolve this conundrum in a way, this equation that is so difficult to tackle. Because on one hand, we do need energy, we do need this region to develop economically, but we also want to see those unique rivers protected because they're really globally valuable and unique in terms of its biodiversity value. So what we decided to do is a kind of two-pronged strategy. So on one hand, we focus on actually working with the policymakers to help them see what are the alternative ways to develop the energy sector. So we do acknowledge that obviously hydropower is a big issue. It will destroy the freshwater habitats, but we're very much aware that the transition is not easy. So this region is actually still heavily dependent on coal power plants that are also much more polluting, I would say, in terms of air pollution, in terms of CO2 emissions as well. And there's the existing hydropower fleet. So as part of the solution of tackling new hydropower challenge, we do think it's important to also think about solar and wind, which are two types of energies that are very, very underutilized in this region at the moment. So we are bringing our scientific capacity, work with local experts to empower them, as well as the local governments to think through where can we build solar and wind in a sustainable way to reduce the need for hydropower. But we are very much aware, I would say, that maybe some of the hybrid hydropower will need to stay or be built to balance the system out, because we do know that the energy capacities will need to shift also if the coal power plants are going to close down in the coming decades. On the other hand, we acknowledge that we really need to. There are rivers that are so unique globally that they need to be preserved, and this is where our strategy goes into a more traditional nature conservation approach. So this is where we kickstarted a campaign that is called United for Rivers, and this is where we really focus on those most valuable rivers like Morača that I mentioned in Montenegro or Neretva in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where we're then working with the local partners to durably protect them for the decades to come.
And you've had some success there. We read in the British press that Albania had declared the first fully wild river in the last couple of years. Were you involved in that? And which river is that? Tell us about that.
So that's something that I cannot definitely credit to the Nature Conservancy. That is a remarkable work done by the Blue Heart of Europe Coalition. So local partners, so the Albanian NGOs that have been working and campaigning very, very hardly on this for years with their support of global partners. So European ones like Riverwatch, as well as the global ones like Patagonia, for instance. And that, I would say, is indeed one truly remarkable success that happened at the European continent in the past several years. And so Vjosa is one of the last free-flowing rivers of Europe, and it's also the longest one in terms of the free-flowing rivers that we have in Europe. It flows between Albania as well as into Greece, and it's been facing hydropower pressures for years and years. And so it was their dedicated, I would say, perseverance to protect it that led to this fantastic result of declaring a first wild river national park in Albania. And as far as I know, they're now working on also making it operational, setting the management structure and so on. So I think this case is truly inspiring, as it really shows how big wins and big success can look like.
So the river Vjosa, which flows through Albania and into Greece, is now fully protected from top to bottom. Is that right?
That part, I'm not sure at the moment, because I believe that the work is still ongoing on the Greek side, because it flows between two countries. So as far as I know, what we followed and what we really celebrated in the past years has been the protection on the Albanian side, where most of the river anyway flows. And I've been following. I've heard that the Greek part, so the Greek government is also interested in protecting its part, but whether they will eventually create like a transboundary protected area, that I'm not sure of yet.
So in some countries, rivers have been given a kind of legal personhood. I wonder if that's part of your campaign, if that's something we could conceive of achieving here in Europe.
That is an interesting one. That is really something that I think is a very fascinating approach to rivers. And I would say we haven't focused so much on kind of giving rivers the legal voice of a person, so to say. But what we find very, very important in actually giving people who live next to those rivers and who really kind of enjoy and steward the rivers as well, the strongest voice in the protection process. So when we were starting this work, our inspiration was the U.S. Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. So this is a legislation that was made in the U.S. back in 1950s. And so this is a law that really acknowledges that the river is not only valuable for its biodiversity, but also for the cultural and spiritual significance that it has for communities. We do know many communities have formed, and especially, again, in the U.S., indigenous peoples would have their spiritual and cultural practices happening around rivers. We see that happening in the Balkans as well. So you have many monasteries, whether they're Catholic or Orthodox or even Muslim. They all revolve around rivers, whether it's at the source or it's at the confluence. So the water is always part of all this symbolics. And so what we are always arguing as well, and we have one example in Croatia of the Krupa River that was actually protected based on cultural significance. So it's not always and only about biodiversity. It's about making sure that the value that the river has for the local community is taken into account.
Yeah, I think that's just such an interesting angle. And the giant river restorations that are taking place in the US are often tied up with the spiritual significance for indigenous communities. And I'm keen to speak for this podcast to someone involved in the largest dam removal in history, which is the removal of dams along the Klamath River in California, Oregon. And that's a process that has been led by the indigenous communities of that part of the United States. And here closer to home, I mean, Ireland has 3,000 holy wells. You know, these natural springs and watercourses are intricately tied up with our identity and with our spirituality, even if we don't know it. I mean, the meaning of the Mersey, for example, to Liverpudlians, or the Thames to Londoners. You know, these things can't adequately be valued. And so I think that's an interesting angle, this idea of either giving legal personhood to these rivers or total legal protection, as has happened with the Vjosa. What about restoration work? To what extent is that needed in the blue heart of Europe, the actual removal of dams and weirs?
I would say for sure this is something that is coming up. So we have decided to prioritize protection for the time being, so we don't get actually into a position that we need to restore these rivers, I would say, under big pressure in the next 10 or 20 years. Protection, I would say protection first, given how much pressure there is, and the current value of and good ecological status of rivers. But we are, as we're moving along with protection, so we also have another river, for instance. I can use the example of Zeta River in Montenegro. That's a river that we assisted protecting back in 2019, and since then we've been working on making its management operational. So what does that mean? It may sound a bit dry, but in reality, what we see in the Balkans, and why maybe many people underestimate the Balkans, is because it's a complicated region, complicated politics, corruption, poverty, which means that when you have a new protected area, there's not a lot of support, financial nor necessarily governmental, to actually establish this area fully operational as a protected area. And then what we hear happens is that many protected areas become paper parks. And so it means an area is legally designated, made protected, but nothing has actually changed. So the environmental situation has not improved, or maybe it can happen that it has even changed and that the protected area or the nature in that space got damaged. So what we're really working on and what we're committed to is then figuring out how to make that area truly protected. And part of that is also looking into restoration opportunities. So Zeta was one of those rivers that is not a typical Balkan river, so not the typical karstic river. It's the one that is much more low gradient and that has actually been feeding the communities around and providing baseline for dairy industry and for a lot of agriculture. It's kind of the main agriculture area of Montenegro. So there we really see a lot of opportunities for restoration, in both in terms of dam removal, but also just the pure kind of water quality. So this is now, I would say, as we move along with also protection initiatives, we can also look at the whole watershed, I would say, approach and tackle and integrate some of those issues out as well.
This episode of Rewilding the World is very kindly brought to you by Uni, that's UNI, the world's first nature-friendly line of luxury body care. We've all heard about the harm that sun cream does to coral reefs, but it's not just sun cream and it's not just coral reefs. Well, Uni makes plastic-free, nature-friendly essentials like shampoo, conditioner, hand wash, and even natural deodorant, all full of nourishing ingredients such as seaweed kelp, aloe vera, and olive oil. We've been loving our Uni products, but don't take it from me. Here's my wife, Jemima.
Yes, I really love them. They're such clean and nourishing products. The microalgae body oil is so good and really smells amazing.
You can find Uni products at Space NK or at weareuni.com. And what sort of opportunities are for communities in these countries to develop a nature tourism industry built upon these extraordinary rivers? I mean, I want to visit. I'm sure people listening to this podcast are feeling the temptation to come and visit some of these turquoise rivers and the forests that surround them. Does that infrastructure exist? Is there any investment in this? Is it happening?
So there, I'll use maybe a couple of examples because the situation is different from country to country. And I would firstly say, yes, please come visit, because what we do want to see is more and more tourists and people who are appreciative of nature to come and share and enjoy this, the beauty that we have to offer. So I would say also the people of the region are very welcoming and they feel proud. So when they can come, and show to people from abroad how beautiful this area is, it really does spark pride and joy. And this is also partly what we are trying to achieve through United for Rivers campaign that is really made to empower those people and, really bring joy and pride in them. So when it comes to the tourism at the moment, as I said, it varies from country to country. So I will contrast maybe Croatia and Montenegro. So in Croatia, I've mentioned the TNC has its own program and we're working on protection of River Mrežnica. And actually one of the biggest challenges we see on that river is kind of managing tourism, because Mrežnica is a river that is very close to Croatian capital of Zagreb. And this is where many people also from Croatia go to spend their weekends. There's a lot of weekend houses. There's a lot of rafting, kayaking. So the tourism industry is already quite involved. And so the help that the county kind of nature protection institute asked from us was, please help us make this tourism sustainable. So one of the concrete activities that we are currently doing with them is to figure out what is the carrying capacity, so to say, of the area, to figure out a plan how to truly manage tourism here. So it means all the activities. So it means also restaurants, bungalows, so all these kind of camp houses and all of that. So that's something that we hope to see. We hope to see the river firstly formally protected by the end of this calendar year, and then going into the next year, we really hope to start operationalizing that plan. However, there are other areas, like I've mentioned, for instance, Morača or Neretva. So Morača is one of these remarkable rivers in Montenegro, Neretva down in Bosnia, and these areas are much wilder, and so the infrastructure there is far less. And what we also see in these areas is that the population is generally leaving these spaces and they're moving to the capitals. They are searching for better economic opportunities. They're also searching for, education and healthcare for, their kids and so on. And this is where our focus is on helping them create the sustainable local jobs. So if they can actually, continue, let's say, work in agricultural sector and produce, a wonderful cheese or olive oil, or, the products and jams, that are truly coming from now a protected area that they can brand and market and sell to tourists or, to the local industries. This is sort of a job creation and a model that we are trying to promote in these areas.
Nature tourism of this kind, as well as artisanal products, have brought real economic recovery in countries further west, in Spain's Asturias, for example, or the Apennine Mountains of central Italy, even here in this country, in the Highlands of Scotland, where nature recovery is taking place. There is certainly the beginnings of a recovery of prosperity as well. What about the wildlife in your area, Dragana? Can you just tell us a little bit about the iconic species that exist there?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very proud every time when I can really say that Balkans is one of the regions where we still have wolves and bears kind of freely roaming the forests. So those would be probably the two most iconic species that we have in terms of wildlife.
So, sorry, wolves and bears. How is the conflict managed with pastoral farmers and so on?
I've been trying to kind of follow that side a bit, because obviously working on rivers, we are focused on working actually with fly fishermen, for instance. So I would say the conflict that we are working on is somewhere else. But I would say that in my experience now, observing what's happening in Europe, there doesn't seem to be as much conflict. So again, because I think the landscape is such that the wolves and bears still remain in very wild areas in the forests, and there are not as many occurrences when it comes to kind of clash with the agricultural sector. We also have a hunting culture that persists for centuries, probably decades in any case. So I haven't seen much of the discussion that I see is currently happening in Europe. So yeah, our focus is more on working with, for instance, fly fishing communities and the fishing community more broadly to really find a way to work together and to focus on managing rivers jointly.
And so you have bears, you have wolves, you have lynx.
Yeah, exactly. So the one that I was going to mention was the Balkan Lynx, because that's another kind of really iconic case of our partner NGOs working in North Macedonia in Mavrovo National Park to actually prevent one of the large hydropower projects that would destroy the habitat of the Balkan lynx and basically the project could have led to the extinction of the species. However, our colleagues in North Macedonia, NGO Ecosvest, they persisted, and in the end they won, so they managed to stop the project, and so Macedonia is still home to the Balkan lynx. I just got back from Montenegro, and so there we went out in nature and also with some of the local biologists and experts, and they told us that in Montenegro, for instance, they haven't seen the lynx in years now. So I think there is definitely movements around, and that we may be losing some of the species, but we do know that it's still out there in North Macedonia.
And what about large grazing animals? I mean, there's a trend now across Europe to restore European bison. I saw recently a video of 20 tauros, which are the modern day equivalents of the old aurochs, the wild cattle, being released in the Greda Valley in Portugal. European bison are recovering in a number of different European countries. Are there large grazers in this blue heart of Europe yet?
Yeah, to some extent. I hear also, I mean, again, it's less of a focus of our work, but I do hear there are individual initiatives. So in Croatia, in the area of Velebit Mountain, I believe, and also in Serbia, in the area of Fruška Gora. So yeah, I hear that this trend as well is picking up bit by bit.
And of course, with your focus on rivers, you must be aware of the return of beavers in some of these countries. Beavers, which were driven nearly to extinction across Europe, have now been carefully reintroduced in a bunch of different places, including Croatia. And the population is expanding outwards. And beavers play an incredibly important role in the restoration of river systems and in management of the hydrological cycle. By building the little dams along the creeks and streams, they hold water in the landscape in a way that pretty much no other species can. Are you aware of this? Is this part of the program that you're working on?
Yeah, I'm very much aware of that, and we were really looking into kind of as well, where are they present and where do we interact them in rivers where we work. So this question was actually raised just a few months ago when we were in Croatia on Mrežnica River, so one of the rivers we are working on protecting as part of the United for Rivers campaign. But there it's also the local community is asking a question about how do we manage beavers, because they notice that they're also damaging trees, for instance. So there was a question and for a discussion in the community, okay, how, are beavers good or bad in a way? But I think the local authorities who manage these protected areas are doing their good job also on communicating with the local communities and explaining also the role of a beaver in the ecosystem. I think that's maybe a beaver needs a communications campaign in some of these places.
Absolutely. After so many centuries of absence, people simply aren't used to the effects of having beavers in a river system. And now they're coming back, and that's wonderful news. What about the EU's nature restoration law, Dragana? There's been a huge amount of kind of fighting between different political factions in the European Union over this nature restoration law, and it looks like it's on track. How important a piece of legislation is that going to be for the work you're doing in the Balkans?
I think this is really a quite globally unique piece of legislation. So I think at least here at the Nature Conservancy, but also in Brussels, if we talk to our colleagues among the civil society, this is really seen as the landmark legislation that will determine kind of where will Europe go next in terms of its nature recovery. Again, for us in the Balkans, we remain focused for the years to come on protecting those most valuable rivers, as the 13 of them as part of the United for Rivers campaign, but as well in the entire time with the lookout at the nature restoration law, because it will really require all countries to take nature restoration way more seriously. So we know that there's already a target of 25,000 kilometers of rivers to be restored through this effort. So I would say that many of our partners, including governments, like looking especially in some of the countries where we work, Croatia and Slovenia, they are already thinking and I would say getting ready to start implementing this law as soon as it's in place. So I do hope that the challenges with the sectors of, let's say, energy or agriculture have now been mediated, and that we are now waiting for the last steps before its adoption.
Yeah, and that really will be an enormous piece of news of global significance. I completely agree. The EU's nature restoration law, and hopefully it will lay some sort of a foundation for reform of the common agricultural policy as well, which consumes almost half of the EU's budget, and I guess is less of an issue in the blue heart of Europe, but across great swathes of the continent, the intensification of agriculture during the last 40 years has been catastrophic for the environment. So linking subsidies that are handed out to farmers with the stewardship and restoration of soil and nature, I think, could be as big a move as the nature restoration law. Dragana, if I wanted to visit, what's the best way to do that? Where would you recommend someone goes if they want to get their first taste of these caustic blue rivers and these wild forests?
Yeah, that is always a difficult question to answer because, as I mentioned, we work across 8 countries and each of them has its own, unique values. But where kind of I often go and where I bring my guests and that I really recommend, I think, as a good starting point is Montenegro. I recommend Montenegro because it's a small country. It's actually just under 14,000 square kilometers. So I recently had guests from Switzerland, so I was able to compare it and say it's one third of Switzerland, if that helps anyone on this podcast visualize the size of it. But I will make one comparison with the UK of Montenegro, and that is that I've also recently read. So Montenegro is the first country in Europe in terms of plant biodiversity per square kilometer. So in Montenegro, there's 3,600 different plant species, while in the UK, there's only about 1,100 based on the information I read. So it's just such a small space packed with so much biodiversity. And again, it goes back to what we said at the beginning. It's a country that is between the Adriatic Sea and the tall Dinaric karst mountains. And that results in such a unique set of soil and climate and the interactions of basically natural elements that creates these really unique conditions for many freshwater species, hundreds of endemic species to develop over there. So it's a really place that you can, quickly discover from the mountains in the north, rivers that flow all across. And then there's also the Skadar Lake, I should not forget that, which is the largest lake in the Balkans, a natural lake that then also has all these fantastic rivers flowing into it and another river, Bojana, flowing out of it and down to the Adriatic Sea. So safe travels, I would say, and enjoy.
Thank you. I absolutely plan on visiting the region as soon as I can, and we'll stay in touch.
Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure.
There aren't many places left in Europe that really can be considered pristine. So while on this podcast series we often talk to people who are restoring degraded places, it's so invigorating to have spent this time with Dragana, who's working to protect one that doesn't need restoring. We've had some really lovely reviews for this podcast series. It has invigorated us to keep on going, make more of them, spread the word about these exciting stories from around the world, spread the good news. If you've got a project you think that I should cover in this podcast series, we'd love to hear from you. And we're also grateful to everything you do, spreading the word among your friends and so on. Thank you. Next time, I'm going to be talking to legendary conservationist John Watkin, who's the outgoing chief executive of Sahara Conservation, an organisation charged with restoring a vast landscape in Africa's Sahel region, including reintroducing scimitar-horned oryx, addax, and various other species which had either disappeared or nearly disappeared. It's an amazing story. I hope you'll join us.
You already know that this isn't about one species. It's about systems, interdependence, collapse. And yet, wild salmon, one of the clearest indicators we have, are vanishing fast. Their decline signals something deeper, something more dangerous. I'm Jim Murray. I host The Last Salmon. It's not a side story. It's the biodiversity story that everyone like you should be listening to. Season 2's out now.
One of the best ways to support rewilding is to go and visit rewilding projects on the ground. My friends at the European Nature Trust have asked me to tell you about a series of coexistence adventures that they've put together. They're designed to give you the best chance of seeing Europe's most iconic species, bears, wolves, lynx, and so on. All of these are on the rise in Europe because of rewilding projects. These trips are hosted by expert guides and conservationists, and most importantly, the European Nature Trust is giving half of the revenues directly to the foundations working on the ground to restore wildlife. I'd love you to check out these coexistence adventures at the European Nature Trust website.